Welcome back to the program. All right, time for The Jury. This is a segment we began last week, a focus group, essentially, that we're holding in the seat of Reid, the Western Sydney seat of Reid in New South Wales. Liberal-held seat at the moment, as you can see, the margin 4.7%. It sits in the west of Sydney, or the inner west, to the west of Sydney there. And the undecided voters who've been taking part in this focus group as of last week and during the final weeks of this campaign are watching it and telling us what they think. This is essentially what the major parties do to work out their campaign lines and, yes, sometimes the details of their policies as well, and certainly during election campaigns to test what's working and what's not. It's a really interesting insight into the sort of voters who are now starting to make up their minds but are still in play, many of them. What can be said, done, offered, promised to win them over to the other side or to lock them in on one side? Let's take a look. Now, they began this session well, they all watched the debate, the leaders' debate that took place in Perth on Monday night, and they were shown various segments of the debate for this focus group session as well. We begin here with what they thought about some of the economic debate, cost of living, economic management, and who do you trust with the nation's finances? Have a look.
Just from watching that debate last night between Scott Morrison and Bill Shorten. Bill Shorten seemed more genuine and more for the struggling population, whereas Scott Morrison still seems more towards the top end, as they call it.
A lot of the things that Bill Shorten said yesterday were, you know, it's like a like a good wish list.
It's a wish list.
Or basically, since the Liberal took over the Labor, nothing has been so cheap as cost living. Everything's been going up, and the wages the same for the last probably 8 years, 6 years.
Cost of living, everything's going up in Australia except people's wages. We've got a plan to help cap private health insurance fees, to help with 1 million Australian households with their childcare costs. We want to get wages moving again and start restoring some of those penalty rates which were arbitrarily cut.
He's a nail on the head.
Did he? Anything compelling? Battler. So that's a battler speech, is it? He's promising on the wages.
Yeah, which is what a lot of people like to hear.
The guy in the past, he promised and promised, only promised. But the MP now, Morris, is more exactly he said what he was doing for us.
Ah, right. But so you're saying Morrison, he's saying what he actually can do.
Yes.
Over the last 5.5 years, our government has delivered a stronger economy. We have seen unemployment come down. We have seen record jobs growth, particularly for young Australians. Last year, some 100,000 young Australians got a job.
Is this a believable clip? Do we think that is a reasonable claim?
From what I've seen, I mean, the employment growth is increasing, but at the same time, there are a lot of mature age people who are getting retrenchment from their company and unable to get back into the workforce again.
Did you say more trustworthy?
In terms of in comparison to Bill Shorten, more trustworthy in terms of managing the finance of the country.
Fundamental of any company or any government is to be responsible for the economy of the country and also the trades that we have with other countries nearby. And in my mind, Liberals been slightly better on that, but that doesn't mean that Labor has been always bad.
He backed himself in the long-term stability by talking about the facts, when he's talking about the 5 years of good economy, low unemployment. So he's using that as a fact to justify, to say that under Liberal we will have a long-term good economy in Australia.
So look, just having played it twice and having a little chat, you've sort of convinced me that that's quite a convincing grab.
It is, yeah, but that's not enough to change my mind at all.
No, it's
not at all.
Sorry, it's not.
I don't know.
It's not enough to make to sway me either side, though. No.
So if you're wondering why politicians repeat the same line over and over again, run it in their ads over and over again, that's why it does start to stick with a lot of voters, clearly. Bill Shorten's pitch on cost of living, everything's going up except your wages. Scott Morrison coming across as more trustworthy. We're getting the budget back into that. We can pay for all these things that we're doing. Now, climate change, we know, was a debate also in that debate. It's been a debate throughout this campaign as well. How's that playing out? Bill Shorten saying we need more action on climate change. Scott Morrison chasing him to explain what it's going to cost the economy. Have a look.
We've set our 2030 targets. We've set out where every tonne of abatement will be achieved and how that will be achieved. The cost is $3.5 billion to the budget. And I just simply want to know, Labor's got a different policy. They say it should be 45%, and Australians should know what that's going to cost. I want my kids to know what that's going to cost because they're the ones who are going to be paying for it.
OK. Well, the problem which we're debating here is the government fair income on climate change, or do we have better policies? The government wants to scare people and say that if you vote Labor and we take real action to get more renewables in our energy system, and somehow this will be some horrendous cost. This government's finding too many excuses not to act. In terms of our policy, we want least cost abatement.
What's going on there?
I just felt Scott Morrison was on the attack towards Bill Shorten. He was like demanding answers out of him and like straight up. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a prime minister yet, and he can't have just exact figures. Give him a chance.
Yeah. He's just trying to make a fool of him somehow.
I think it's a huge issue as well, and putting numbers and exact figures around such a big policy is going to lead to broken promises anyway. It's like, look at the NBN. Oh my gosh, what a blowout.
I like how Scott Morrison is using our children as hostage to not doing anything about climate change. So he's saying, if we follow Labor's policy, your kids will be paying for it. That's right. I mean, you have, as a leader, you have to have vision to have, like, I think the climate change issue is, real. Like, we need action on it. Definitely need action on it. And what Liberal is saying, we're not doing too much action on it because it's going to cost the country too much.
Let's have a look. We've got two more clips.
You've got to make choices in government. We've decided to find pensioner dental care up to $1,000 over 2 years for every pensioner in Australia. But your change that you're concerned about with pensioners, that doesn't happen. We're not touching the pension.
Well, I'm sorry, Mark, I've got to pick him up here because it does hit pensioners, as he knows full well that if you have a self-managed super fund and you're a pensioner, it hits you. They've paid tax all their lives, Mark, and I think that's the great offence that I think retirees have felt as a result of this measure.
It's out for the rich, the wealthy. Not everyone's going to retire on a self-funded super.
Yeah.
Heaven's sakes.
I'm wondering generally, like, what were they saying?
How top end we're talking here because, well, my employer contributes. I have super, and I just saw my statement the other day and went, oh, that's what I've got. But I also know that it's not enough to live off for however long. Like, people can't afford to retire.
No,
and so they are working longer, and therefore they are taxpayers. And so it is hard when you then say, oh, well, it's not in, like, what is the top end? Like, am I only comparing blue collar to white collar, or am I comparing everyone to millionaires?
It's a bit greyer, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
it's a bit more nuanced than our initial reaction.
Yeah, I think...
Because you're sympathising with...
I sympathise with those who have just worked and have, you know, they've worked hard, and no matter what industry you're in, you know, we are all paying tax and we are all working hard for our money. And so I do want to see people looked after.
Well, some sympathy there, as you saw, for those who do have franking credits in retirement. But sympathy also we saw for Bill Shorten on the climate front. Yes, he's being pursued by Scott Morrison over the cost of Labor's policies, but some say are giving him a bit of a break, at least in that group, on the inability to do so from opposition. Now, Clive Palmer's been a pretty big story over the last few days as well, and we know that a preference deal's been done with the LNP and the Clive Palmer United Australia Party. How's that gone down?
But at the end of the day, when we have to decide, do we think that the United Australia Party would be more dangerous to the Australian economy than Bill Shorten, the Labor Party and the Greens? Well, I'm sorry, I think Bill Shorten, the Labor Party and the Greens are.
If Mr Morrison wants to sort of smirk about getting some deals with Clive Palmer, so be it. I couldn't ultimately do a deal with this guy.
He rejected
and you're going to... No.
He rejected you.
What debt is Mr Palmer going to come knocking on the door of the Prime Minister if, in fact, Mr Palmer rescues the Prime Minister? We've had 6... Oh, yes. You haven't met Clive Palmer, if you believe that.
We'll step in there. What's the deal?
He's a good Samaritan, Clive Palmer.
That's a good point.
Well, of course not. There are no policy bills
you're good,
when it comes
Samaritan.
to this arrangement. But I ask you the
It
same.
was just lucky.
Bill, I'll
He's
ask
the
you
unicorn
same.
of Liberal politics.
Right, so that's quite a...
That's towards the end. That's when, see, I watched the whole thing. That's towards the end, and that's when Bill Shorten becomes more confident in himself. Whereas in the first clip when he was talking about, I can't remember what he was talking about in the first clip. It was
That's a worry.
It was like he was talking like a robot.
Yeah.
Right.
Robot. But now a bit towards the end, he's more confident, and I think that's at that point. That's when he wins all that undecided. That's how he got those 25 votes.
Finally showed he's got a personality, more to the point.
Yeah.
Bill Shorten, in my eyes anyway, historically has just been this bland, flavourless, like monotone, boring face.
I mean, Liberal Party used to hate Clive Palmer for years.
It's funny because on the radio this morning, Pauline Hanson said that the Liberal Party was giving their preference to Labor over, and I was like, what? I was like, so I'm a bit confused because that she was very upset that she wasn't getting preferences, and so that's where I was sort of a bit, hold on, I've heard two different things now.
Does any of this matter? This
Yeah,
I think
because
the understanding
this
of
does
preferences
it
does.
matter?
I think the
it's a
understanding
neck
of
to
what the
neck,
preference-
remember? It's
It's neck to neck, so it matters,
So
right?
it does matter, yeah. They need any
But
preferences.
people need to know where the preferences lie. So if Liberal is giving their preferences to Clive Palmer, then the voter needs to understand that.
Personally, I don't like Clive Palmer's party because I think they're a bit of a nonsense. All that high-speed rail, and Clive Palmer's just bombarding us with advertising.
Text messages.
Text messages.
I just think he's a rogue.
I think he's in politics because he's got a lot of self-interest. He's in,
And he's
you know,
rich. He's got the money to do it.
You don't just get into politics when you are
Plus,
doing...
$50 million just advertising.
Yeah. He's out of touch with us, definitely. But this is Reid you're talking about. So if you ask someone from Queensland, it'll be a different thing. But us, because we're Reid, we don't like Clive Palmer.
Well, there you go. Not a lot of love for Clive Palmer in that room. Final clip we want to show you here. Are some of them starting to make up their minds? Well, yes, they are. Let's have a look.
I'm undecided. I'm leaning towards, should I say that or should I?
You can.
Liberal?
Could you, Jacques, still go either way?
No, I think I'll be going Labor, to be honest. 95% I'll be going Labor.
We'll see. We'll see. No doubt. What could the Liberals say to you to attract you?
More money in hand. And not from the days when John Howard was in power. He did a good job. But I think Australians need a change.
My issue is there's no strong leadership on either side. I don't see Scott Morrison being a good leader. I don't see Bill Shorten as a good leader either. I already miss Julie Bishop, knowing that she's not going to be our foreign minister anymore. If she was standing for Liberals, I'd vote for him.
I have an investment property. So what I've seen in the news is Labor is raising the capital gains tax, as well as the abolishing the negative gearing. That's the one. So that to me sort of pushed me away from Labor.
After seeing the debate yesterday, it seems like Bill Shorten is doing much better in terms of what he's saying than Scott Morrison. So a little bit of swaying.
I'm an undecided voter, but I'm now leaning towards Labor.
You've had a lean, have you?
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
since last week?
Since watching last night.
Oh, so I take it these debates have an influence then?
Debates do matter, no doubt about that. Let's bring in the man in the middle there, our moderator for these focus groups, Jerry Barone, joining us once again. Jerry, terrific work there again. Look, thanks for your time this afternoon.
Pleasure.
What was most interesting to you this week in this week's session?
Well, I thought the leadership attitudes were very interesting because, as you heard, they don't think that either of the leaders are the right leadership material. And that's largely because of all the changes over the past several years. But I did think they both scored points because Morrison came over with his, regular guy persona. I call it Matey Morrison. Not in the groups, but Matey Morrison, that's the, I'm an average guy, but I'm just very clever. And our voters did notice he was on top of his facts and fairly sharp. Not just about the car price. And then on the Shorten side, they did give him points for loosening up at the end of the interview. And they criticised him for being generally maybe rather wooden and remote. So Shifty Shorten is my shorthand. But they said he did loosen up. So it's on the one hand, Matey Morrison, and the other hand, a loosening Shorten. Both scored, both landed punches, I think. But it's still, both landed punches, but it's quite even in that leadership credibility.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, and I had the same feeling. Shorten used to cop it for all these zingers, but some of those zingers that he rolled out in the debate, the people in that focus group certainly like.
They did, and in fact, it did seem to be something they paid attention to, and overall, our Reid voters gave the whole debate at a short head to Shorten, but they said the reason for that is because he loosened up at the end. Like, they don't really believe they don't really believe it's much of a gap like the studio audience. They mentioned the figures of the studio audience, but they said, but that doesn't reflect real life. It's just a short head for Shorten in this debate because he loosened up, because he expressed. Oh, interesting.
We saw the exchanges there on climate change as well, and there's no doubt on the campaign trail, Bill Shorten's copping it for this cost question. What's it going to cost? You know, the government's running that very hard every day. But in the group, there was a bit of sympathy for Bill Shorten on this front. What did you make of that?
This is very interesting, the climate change issue, because, of course, being a lifetime professional researcher, I've heard for 20 years people say they care about climate, but they don't do anything. For example, very few of us buy electric cars. Very few of us. So I think the takeout of the group, they're thinking, what's the coalition saying? They're saying it's too expensive, so we're going to do nothing. And then on the Labor side, they're thinking, well, it's obviously going to cost, but they're going to do something. So I think it comes down to silence versus do something. And because of that, even despite the criticism it'll cost a lot, Labor I do think Labor are scoring a point. They're winning that round. It's odd because one of the group participants said, well, isn't climate change an economic issue? Shouldn't the coalition be saying, hey, let's get into renewables, let's do it gradually, let's make it part of Australia's economic rich future? But presumably, because of the conflict in the coalition on the issue, they're not saying that. So I just think that's what's interesting, silence versus something for Labor. Very interesting.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point. Jerry, another really interesting session. Look forward to catching up next week, and we'll see what the group think by then. Appreciate your time.